we are getting a clearer picture of how Americans are feeling about President Trump and his economic policy, now 12 weeks into his second term. CNN Chief Data Analyst Harry Inton is here to run the numbers. Hello, Harry. Happy Sunday to you.
You as well.
Okay, so where are we with Americans and how they're viewing the economy?
Yeah, so a CBS News YouGov poll came out earlier today, and I will just say, I'll put it in stark terms, I believe this is the worst poll that Donald Trump has received in his second term, and we can go through it, Jessica. Let's talk about the economy, right? Think the economy is getting worse. Back in November, it was 42% of Americans. You don't have to be a genius to follow this timeline. By February, it was 49%, March, 51%. Look at where we are now, 53%. The clear majority of Americans think the economy is getting worse, and that number is rising. When Trump, of course, won that second term, it was 42%. Now we're up 11 points. The clear majority, 53%. This poll and this number in particular is no bueno for the President of the United States, Jessica.
And who are they blaming for what they are seeing as an economic downturn?
Yeah, okay. So, obviously, you had Joe Biden before you had Donald Trump. And, of course, Donald Trump would say, you know, Joe Biden left us in a horrible state, and I have to help dig us out of it. All right, so let's take a look here. More responsible for the state of the economy, or the economic state. In March, CBS News asked about inflation, and 38% said it was Joe Biden who was more responsible, compared to 34% who said Donald Trump. Let's jump forward to now, in the month of April. Look at this number, 54% of Americans say that Donald Trump is more to blame for the state of the economy than Joe Biden. Joe Biden's number has fallen from 38% to 21%. Donald Trump may try to blame Joe Biden for this, and maybe that was working a month ago in the month of March. But since the tariff war has begun, it's not working anymore. Americans are not buying what Donald Trump is selling them. They believe, the clear majority, 54%, that Donald Trump is more to blame for the state of the economy at this point than Joe Biden is, Jessica.
That is interesting to see how that evolves just in the last month, really.
Yeah.
How are they viewing tariffs?
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, the big thing when it comes to the state of the economy right now for Donald Trump is tariffs. So let's take a look here. All right. The tariff plan, new tariffs on importing goods, oppose versus favor. You go back to January. Look at this. 48% said they favored these new tariffs, these Donald Trump tariffs, compared to 46% who opposed. Look at where we are now in the CBS News YouGov poll. A switcheroo, Jessica, a switcheroo. The clear majority, 58% of Americans oppose these new tariffs, compared to just 42% who favor them. Again, this is part of the picture that we've seen throughout this presentation, right, Jessica? More and more people are turning against Donald Trump. Their views of the economy are getting worse. They are holding Donald Trump responsible. And when it comes to his signature issue, so far in his second term, tariffs, I mean, my goodness gracious, that trend line is ridiculously awful for Trump. The opposition number from 46 to 58 and the favor from 48 to 42. Americans have switched on a dime on the economy, on Donald Trump, in large part because of the tariffs, which they increasingly do not like.
And what's the biggest problem with Trump's plan for these people?
Well, I think it's the biggest problem that you hear our analysts say all the time is they don't know what the heck Donald Trump is doing. It's his approach. I mean, take a look here. Trump's approach to tariffs and trade, that is the way he's going about it. Just 37% of Americans like it. Look at this number. 63%, nearly two-thirds dislike it. Among independents, Jessica, it's just 28% of independents who like the way that Donald Trump is approaching tariffs and trade. And that's not much of a surprise, because one day Donald Trump is saying one thing, the next day he's saying another. One day someone from his administration saying one thing, the next day that same exact person saying another. The message, simply put, is unclear, and it's the approach more than anything else, Jessica Dean, that the folks in the American public dislike about Donald Trump and his way that he's going about the tariffs and trade policy of the second Trump administration.
Very interesting. And then overall, how does this affect his approval rating?
Yeah, okay, so we talk about the economy, right? But does the economy, the way people feel about the economy, equal the way they feel about Donald Trump overall? Because if it doesn't, if these two paths don't cross, then these numbers don't mean anything.
Right.
But let's take a look right here. Donald Trump's net approval rating. In early February, according to CBS News, look at that, it was +6. Late February +2, March 0, even approval, disapproval. Look at where we are now, -6 points. He's underwater for the first time in the CBS News YouGov poll, at least in his second term. Again, it's the trend line that's so important here, and the trend line and the American people are turning against Donald Trump. And that's why I said at the beginning, Jessica, that this, in my mind, is the worst poll that Trump has received in his second term so far.
And joining me now is the top Democrat on the Senate Banking Committee, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Senator, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it. You have called yourself a big supporter of tariffs. You've been a staunch critic of unfair trade practices from China. Less than a year ago, you praised President Biden's decision to slap tariffs on Chinese goods because he was, in your words, quote, standing up for American workers, unquote. So specifically on China, can you detail what exactly you would be doing differently than President Trump?
Well, let's keep in mind, tariffs can be an important tool in the toolbox when used in targeted ways. But right now what we've got is chaos and corruption. Donald Trump has imposed a tariff on everyone, everywhere, on all products. That's the 10% tariff. Of course, it was much higher earlier in the week. And now in this trade war with China that basically tries to shut down all trade. And then, right out in plain view, as if the chaos weren't enough, he adds a nice layer of corruption for everyone to see, and that is a special deal for his CEO donor, and that is an exception to the China deal for iPhones. You know, look, here's the problem. You can't get an economy strong and moving forward when it's loaded with chaos and corruption. Investors will not invest in the United States when Donald Trump is playing red light, green light with tariffs and saying, oh, and for my special donors, you get a special exception. People make investment decisions that are years into the future. If they're going to build a factory or they're going to rehab an old factory or buy a bunch of new tools. And right now with Donald Trump, nobody can figure out what the rules will be 5 days from now, much less 5 years from now. That's a real hit to our economy and to developing more manufacturing here in the United States.
So on Wednesday, the president announced a pause on most of the tariffs, a 90-day pause, except for the ones on China and except for the 10% across the board. You called for the SEC to investigate whether President Trump intentionally manipulated the market or covered for insider trading when he told Americans on Truth Social and in the Oval Office that they should go invest in the stock market before he announced that pause on the tariffs, and the market soared afterwards. Have you seen any actual evidence that insider trading was going on instead of the just general advice he gave for people to invest?
Well, there are people who have looked at what happened to purchases and to calls just before he made that announcement that caused the stock market to skyrocket. But let me be clear with the back and forth here. That's what investigations are for. And it's entirely appropriate to have an investigation to make sure that Donald Trump, Donald Trump's family, Donald Trump's inner circle didn't get advance information and trade on that information. This is just, you know, this is how the stock market works in order to make sure on a consistent basis that nobody's trading on inside information. And by the way, Jake, the same thing should apply to Congress. And that is, we should have a rule that no one in Congress can trade in any individual stocks. No senator, no representative. I've had that bill for a long time. It's got a lot of support. In fact, it's got some bipartisan support. I think now would be a good time to get it across the finish line and get our representatives out of the business of trading in individual stocks. The American people should never have to wonder when the president, when his cabinet, when members of Congress are making a decision, whether it's for the good of the country or for the good of their own bank account.
Let me ask you a larger philosophical question, because the Democratic Party, obviously not in a great place right now. Democrats seem divided on whether to try to allow room for the belief that tariffs, as you say, targeted tariffs can be a good thing, or whether to reject all of Trump's tariffs outright. We saw this play out with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer making headlines when she visited the White House. She praised tariffs as a useful tool. Take a listen.
I understand the motivation behind the tariffs. And I can tell you, here's where President Trump and I do agree. We do need to make more stuff in America. More cars and chips. More steel and ships. We do need fair trade.
Is there room for that kind of nuanced discussion right now, or do you think what she said was a mistake?
You know, I want to put it slightly differently, and that is, it is a mistake to have the President of the United States out there just playing red light, green light, and saying, oh, this morning I woke up and think the tariffs should be this big. Now I think they should be this big. Now I think they should be somewhere else. And I got to say, saying, well, I will continue to make those decisions, and I'm going to hold off on these tariffs for 90 days. That doesn't put the economy in a better place. That doesn't put investors in a better place. Congress has a job right now, and that is to step up and take this authority away from Donald Trump. He has proven how he will use it, but remember, the statute that he's now using starts with a declaration of emergency. And in that same statute, Congress has the responsibility to decide, is it really an emergency or not?
Awakening for Trump, that the American people are rejecting him on the key questions. And we keep having to stress this, that in Trump's first term, he was never a popular president. Never. Right? His honeymoon was smaller than most presidents. It lasted way less time. People remember, like, at the end of it, Joe Biden wasn't popular. But Joe Biden in his early presidency was much more popular than Trump has been in either of his early presidencies, right? The first few months of his terms, right? But with Trump, he was always popular on the economic questions. Again, undeservedly so. I'm going to say this because I'm not a politician. Sometimes the voters are silly and wrong. Sometimes the voters are wrong. Sometimes the average voter doesn't know what the frig they're talking about. It happens, right? Doesn't mean democracy doesn't work. It means that sometimes the voters make decisions that are factually incorrect, and you got to respect them, but they're wrong, right? Nonetheless, it underscored how, despite his insanity, his unconstitutionality, his creeping towards fascism, the big lie, everything, this and that, his attacks on minorities, his awful behavior, the grift, putting his kids in positions of power, people trusted him on the economy, saying, at least he's good on the economy. Or at least Americans were divided on it, such that he had positive numbers at least a little bit. Not right now. Because the one thing he was supposed to be good at was the economy, lowering prices, increasing wages, helping businesses profit. That was what he was supposed to be doing. And everything he's been doing is the exact opposite. His moves will put workers out of work. He's firing public servants, which will hurt local economies. His tariffs will hurt businesses, big, small, medium, and will hurt consumers as their costs will go up. Workers will lose their jobs as companies can't operate. Donald is creating the exact opposite world he promised to. It's not even a violation of his mandate. It's an anti-mandate.